Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Low Auditorium. My name is Jess Chiraboga, and this is Anders Knospe. I am the interim president of the Dartmouth Political Union, and Anders is an editor of the Dartmouth Jack-O-Lantern, and it is our extreme pleasure to welcome you to tonight's event, Politics Parodied, Exploring Today's Political Satire. Tonight's event was organized by the Dartmouth Political Union and the Dartmouth Jack-O-Lantern. The DPU is a nonpartisan student-run organization dedicated to promoting facts, challenging preconceptions, and seeking nuance. From speaker events like today to weekly meetings and student debates, we seek to foster an environment for free political discourse on campus.
And Jack-O, oh, there we go. Jack-O is Dartmouth's premier comedy and satire publication. We were founded in 1908. We're one of the oldest college comedy publications in the country. And in addition to publications in the fall, spring, and summer, we also regularly publish articles on our website and Instagram, which is at Dartmouth Jack-O, if you want to follow that. And we're so excited to collaborate on this event. It's been a long time coming, so we're super happy we were able to make this happen.
We would also like to thank We would also like to thank the Department of Film and Media Studies, the Department of English and Creative Writing, the Rockefeller Center, and the offices of the President, Provost, and Dean of the College for their support for tonight's event. And lastly, a thank you to Darshana Griggs from Event Operations and Jay from MPG back there for all the hard work that went into making this event a reality. Before we get started, some logistical notes for the evening. We will begin with a moderated question and answer period before shifting into an audience question and answer period. We will have the members of the DPU holding microphones in the aisles if you would like to ask a question. The event is being live streamed and recorded to the DPU YouTube, and we have QR codes near the exits if you wish to share the event stream and recording with others.
I'm going to move to introduce our moderator and panelists for the evening. First, we have Professor Deborah Brooks. She's an associate professor of government at Dartmouth and received her PhD from Yale. Professor Brooks' research examines public opinion, political advertising, women as voters and as leaders, and survey research methods in global health. And she teaches courses on media, campaign ads, and gender and politics. She's the author of He Runs, She Runs, Why Gender Stereotypes Do Not Harm Women Candidates, which have received the Victoria Schuck Award from the American Political Science Association for the best book on women in politics in the year it was published. Among other topics, her courses on the American news media address how to draw people into politics through infotainment, like late news television. Professor Brooks is also a long-term comedy aficionado who used to sneak into 21 and up comedy clubs as a teenager to watch stand-up sets. And she rarely misses a trip up to Montreal's Just for Laughs festival every summer. Welcome, Professor Brooks. A round of applause. We are also joined by our three panelists, Mike Gillis, Evan Sayet, and Jeremy McLellan. Mike Gillis, Dartmouth class of 2012, is the head writer for the satirical news outlet The Onion. His work has also appeared in The New Yorker, Clickhole, and College Humor, and while at Dartmouth, he was editor-in-chief of the Jack-O. A round of applause.
Welcome back.
Then we have Evan Sayet. Evan Sayet is a comedian, writer, and political commentator. Sayet is the creator and frontman of the comedy show The Right to Laugh, a night of conservative comedy. He has written and spoken on the psychology of the modern left, including the critically acclaimed lecture to the Heritage Foundation. I'll make you guys clap again. One more clap after that. And lastly, we have Jeremy McLellan. McLellan is a stand-up comedian who focuses on political and observational satire. He's toured across the U.S., Canada, and Pakistan, and was dubbed one of the Just for Laughs International Comedy Festival's New Faces of Comedy. One last round of applause for all of them now. And now we're going to hand things off to Professor Brooks.
Welcome to our panelists, and it's so great to see so many students here, many faces I recognize, some of the funnier students in my classes after that. I want to say this is 100% a student-created, student-developed program. I'm here helping to work through some of the questions that they propose, working in some of my own twists, but this is really about the students even for this moderated part. So I want to start with the question of, so people can get to know you and your brand of humor, if you were your own publicist, how would you promote yourself and your brand of comedy? And we'll go ahead and start with Mike.
Yes, of course. I have a good answer to that. I suppose my brand of comedy is, I think a good publicist would start with something snappy, like tracing it back to the medieval buffoons in France, who were these, they were named that because they would puff out their cheeks, and so buffoon, and they were these kind of disabled, handicapped people on the edges of society, exiles, vagrants, and things like that, and they would come into the villages once a year after spending a lot of time observing all of the kind of social pressure points of the villages. So they would see like lords having an affair with a baker, and they would see like some priests skimming off the top of the till, and they would come in once a year and they would get this chance to just mock all of that. They would go in front of the Lord's house and they would do a dumb mime of the Lord fornicating with a baker, and they would go in front of with some kind of croissant-based pun, obviously thrown in. And then they would go in front of various places, mocking all of these social pressure points. And eventually, they would wind up in front of the church. And there, they would mock the holiest of holies in the village. And they would start by drawing a circle around themselves in salt. And that was their way of saying, this is a special place. What we're doing right now is this special thing that comedians are allowed to do, which is mock the holiest things in the society and take the things that everybody is completely pent up about and will have an aneurysm about if we don't have any kind of pressure release here. And so then they would go on to mock, the priest. They would mock God, they would mock the church. And it was this one place where you were allowed to do that without getting beheaded or exiled or whatever. And I think that's what I love about comedy. It's this place where we get to air out all of these things that drive us insane otherwise, our mortality, our sense of cultural right and wrong and partisanship and hatred of the other and whatever, and you get to talk about them and not freak out and not have a stroke about it. And I think that for me is what I think is so beautiful about comedy, and that's what my brand, I guess, is that. It's this place where we can hash it out.
And Evan?
First of all, that was absolutely brilliant, but I would fire your publicist because it's supposed, in a publicist, you're supposed to sell it quickly.
I know. I would fire him too. It's a dumb idea.
All right, first of all, there are two different parts, two different aspects to what I've done, the way I've made a living over the last 35 years. There's my own stand-up comedy, and then I get hired to write for other people. When I write for other people, if I was my own PR person, it's that I've been able to find the voice. Because when you're writing for somebody else, it's not like, oh, we think you're funny. It's, oh, can you write for me? And so I've been able to write, let's say I wrote the Arsenio Hall show. I was the voice of Black America for 2 years. And then I wrote the Oak Ridge Boys live from Las Vegas, as redneck as you can be. So I always love when I get hired or when I'm promoting myself, I always use the word veteran. And I've always liked the idea of a journeyman, somebody who's still in the game after all these years. As far as my own stand-up goes, I don't even call myself a stand-up comedian. I call myself a satirist. And the reason I do that is because the definition of a satirist is a comedian who's just not that funny. And so what I've done is I've lowered expectations right there. And then what I do really is I play a little game with my audience, which is I call them stupid, and then they call me stupid, and we go back and forth like that until somehow we work it out. It's an odd thing, but it has worked for 35 years.
And Jeremy?
Okay, I guess what I'm most known for is I'm a Catholic comedian, and I have a very large international Muslim fan base. And I tour, I've toured in like Jordan and Pakistan and the UK, which is now a Muslim country, I think, performing for Muslim audiences. And my main focus, I think, is on comedy as a avenue of pluralism, and not the kind of pluralism where we try to find the lowest common denominator and just sort of celebrate ourselves as these atomistic consumers, but a very rich, thick pluralism that recognizes very thick differences between cultures and religious traditions, and can somehow live sort of on top of each other without sacrificing the things that make life meaningful.
Great. And so my second question is, and it would really be part of your upsell, right? And that is, who is your core audience? Jeremy's already answered that to some extent, but the second piece of it is, are there people that you're not going to hit with? People that just are not part of your core audience, and is there a trade-off there to appeal to your core audience or to kind of bring in new people? So do you want to answer the second part of that? Like, is there any kind of audience where hey, my humor just isn't going to hit with this group, my type, my brand?
Yeah, it's interesting because I really like to have this idealistic outlook on comedy where there's a pure joke that everybody's going to laugh at, but there are just sort of presumptions that are in the background of a lot of jokes where it's like, if somebody doesn't believe the Earth is round, a joke that has to do with circumnavigating the globe is just going to be confusing to them.
Makes sense, yeah.
And so...
And vice versa.
Yeah, right. I would never presume to say that the Earth is actually round or not, but it's like, I think it is, there are times when say a joke that is not, doesn't have as the background the presumption that Donald Trump won his second election, that might be confusing for somebody who assumed that the election was stolen. And so even though I think I could obviously recognize a joke that uses that as the background, like I could see the bones of it and how it works well, it would fail probably to be a good joke for me. And similarly, something that I write that is coming from the perspective that wasn't a stolen election would probably lose that sort of audience.
Well, so I'm going to follow up with you a little bit on this before we move down the table and just say, for The Onion, do you have data on demographics and who's actually viewing The Onion, or do you not have that kind of information?
We do have some demographic data, and so it leans male, not predominantly, but it leans male, and we have more liberal viewers than conservative viewers, but there is a mixture. And then it's something like, 18 to 35-year-olds are our main demographic,
okay.
Age-wise. But yeah, so there's a good mix in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. And Evan, can you kind of explain who's your core audience, and then who is just not getting you?
Well, the only people that I can't make laugh are the ones who will not laugh at a certain topic. And I find that from both sides. Depends on who it is. But again, one of the reasons I've been able to write for so many different disparate people is because a joke is a joke is a joke. I mean, you were just mentioning the bones, knowing what makes something funny. And so if the joke is, if an audience is willing to laugh, then there's no audience that I can't win. And just to give you an example, I mean, you guys know that I'm politically conservative. Family Guy had this where they spoofed Star Wars, and there was this scene where the Death Star goes slowly through the screen, and slowly, finally at the very end has a bumper sticker that says Bush Cheney. That's funny as hell. That's a joke. I mean, even though it's a joke that I don't agree with. So, when you say there are people who think that the election wasn't fair, the election was stolen, they'll get the joke. Whether they'll laugh at it or not is a different question.
Right.
Okay, all right. And then was there anything that you wanted to add to it, Jeremy, about your core audience, it sounds like, is especially Muslim audiences?
Yeah, Muslim and Catholic.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
or Muslims who were formerly Catholic.
Okay. So is it Buddhists and Hindus who are just like, no, that's not for me? Or do you consider yourself appealing to anybody?
Well, I think a good comic should be able to perform in a room with whatever audience and be able to do well. And one of the first rules of stand-up is that you don't blame the room. So there's a lot of comics who go up there and bomb, and then they're like, the audience was just too liberal, And you're like, well, but they came to see a comedy show. They weren't like surprised to see you up there. Like, they came to laugh. And like, I think laughter and humor is something universal. I mean, the first time every person in this room laughed was probably when their mother played peekaboo with them as a child. And that's like a very primal thing where you're suddenly surprised by the arrival of something good. And that, I think, is a very universal thing, and it's something that is, I think, at the core of humor is humor is when you're surprised by something good. And a lot of times when people tell jokes and it falls flat, it's usually because the person didn't consider it good, right? So it turned out to be horror, or it just wasn't surprising. So there's lots of people who, you know, when I tell them that I performed like a Muslim event or like I did a tour of Pakistan, they're like, "Did you do any jokes about Muhammad?" And I'm like, well, I don't think I'd be able to tell a joke about Muhammad that they haven't heard already by like people online. You know, like it wouldn't be surprising at all to them to hear that kind of stuff. And so you have to be able to find anyone and like actually, you know, find the thing that will surprise them. But it has to be something good. It has to be like, even if it's something they're sensitive about and that they're insecure about. Like, I think insults can be a very loving thing, because they can, you know, when you do a roast, like, you get made fun of about stuff that you're sensitive about. And in the end, those are people that still love you. And so it teaches you that those things don't make you unlovable. I think there's something really beautiful about friends insulting each other.
You really suck.
Every single
That wasn't very good at all.
every single person in this room, every single person in this room has friends that they insult, and it's part of what makes marriage work. You know, is you make fun of each other, and I think that's great. As far as people who would not like my material, probably people who like know too much about the Crusades. People are like too educated about it and like have very strong opinions about different battles in the Crusades, and like those people probably wouldn't come to my events. But
Okay, we'll keep you out of the medieval history department here.
I don't know.
Okay. So I'm going to ask a question, and we'll start with our youngest panelist and move up from there. What has changed about political comedy? And the original question was in the past decade, but I'm going to say since you started in it, since you kind of went in that career. So I think you're probably
Well, there's only two choices here.
graduated in 2012.
You can go first.
So,
You can go
like,
first.
To me, you're just a kid. So all right. So what's changed while you've been in the game?
I think the introduction of social media has shifted things a lot. It used to be really nice to just be able to pick up a newspaper from The Onion and read it all the way through. Like, that's how I became a fan of it. And you get immersed in this world that's being created, this kind of fictional, authoritative newspaper that thinks it's the most important thing in the history of humanity, which it is. I think when that's lost, the lack of context makes things much more difficult to kind of intuit that it's just a joke. And I think that's where like out of context comedy clips can become a problem. People are like, oh, you know, this person just seems to be offensive for its own sake. But if you couch it in the environment of a club where people are just kind of talking shit and screwing around, and you realize that this is not just somebody being offensive, they're actually like bringing things up so they can go through this like age-old pattern of you create a lot of tension in the room and then you tell a punchline and that releases the tension, and that's very comforting because it's a good ending to something that seemed like it was going to be freaking horrible, because it was like, oh, I'm going to have to confront the worst thing in the world, and it's like, no, here's an exit ramp and you get to go out and you do it again and again. So I think when that's lost, that's changed a lot.
And that's because people are just getting an Onion story on their Facebook feed without knowing the whole constellation of seeing everything around it.
Yeah, I think that's the case, and like thankfully our headlines are very self-contained, so you get the joke in 5 or 7 words or whatever, and then that it doesn't need as much context as, say, a stand-up bit, which takes a long time to build sometimes if you're not just doing one-liners. So thankfully, we haven't had that much of a fallout, but I think the lack of a context existing in this world, and I think losing the realm of parody, this thing where we're trying really hard to imitate a newspaper and do everything exactly as a newspaper would do. So it's, you know, our website looks like Washington Post, and we have the Latin motto, and we have all these photoshops, and it's surrounded by all, like weather and stock tips and things like that. That like comes, that helps sell the joke a lot because you feel like, oh, this is all part of this facsimile of this thing, and it's making a very silly version of it. And without all of that context, it can be a little bit less fun, I guess.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm realizing I'm just staring at you, and everybody's like, but we're also here. We're the students.
Jeremy, when would you kind of mark the beginning in the game for you on comedy? Like, when did you start? What year?
I started doing comedy in 2013.
Okay.
Started doing stand-up
All
in
right.
2013, and then quit my job in 2016.
Okay.
Like to do comedy, not.
Yeah.
I didn't quit comedy. Like.
I
yeah.
get the sense that's the standard comedian trajectory of you're doing both for a few years
Right.
until you can support yourself. So what have you seen change during that time? Do you have anything to add to social media?
I think that there's been, unfortunately, like a pressure to have your jokes become easily translatable into prose, into like points that you're trying to make. And some of that is because like there are people who that is how they write material, where they're like, I want people to support this policy, and they're like, but how do I make that funny? And then they like write it like that, and you get really bad, like sort of it just serves propaganda purposes. And not that comedy can't, make change happen. Although I think it doesn't work if you try to make things happen. It just sort of works like that. I think that there is a real pressure on comics, especially like late night comics, to sort of telegraph their personal beliefs and personal opinions, so that it's almost like they're afraid to just be silly about certain topics, because like your joke has to defeat Trump, or something like that, where it's too important to be just silly about something. And so I think there has been a decline in silliness in play, where people are just enjoying the delight of making each other laugh, and instead putting it to the service of a particular political program.
Okay. And then, Evan, what would you add to this during your tenure in this world?
Yep. I mean, you got it exactly right as far as it's the weaponizing of humor, that it's no longer laughing at the foibles of our politicians. It's now pointed. It's now used for political purposes. The other thing that I found is the notion of diversity, which is wonderful, has also eliminated the ability to say that people are different as well. And if you can't point out the differences, then we've almost lost our humanity at that point. We've become the exact opposite of diverse. We've all become just monolithic and dull. So having the courage to say, yeah, Pakistanis are different than Ethiopians are different than Jews are different than is part of where the humor used to come from, and actually it was a lubricant to be able to laugh at yourself and laugh at the other's foibles. Now you're not allowed to recognize the differences, and if you try to, it's dangerous.
Okay.
Could I'm curious about both of your opinions on, like, do you even
Excuse me, is this your job?
Yeah, sorry, I don't want to. I was
An alumni, he
like,
gets to do that.
Oh, yeah.
You're a journalist in a way, so
And
that's
yeah,
what you do.
do you even think of that form of like weaponized comedy as comedy per se, or is it more just punditry with this like veneer of humor on it?
The way I describe it is it's vitriol in the guise of humor.
Yeah. I feel the same way.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah.
Okay. So kind of adding on to that, maybe related to that, one question that came from the Jack-O-Lanterns was, how has this so-called cancel culture, in air quotes, or at least the very rise in debate about it, changed how you approach comedy? And just how has it affected comedy in general, in your view? So let's start at the other end. Jeremy, do you want to start us off on that one?
I think that the only thing that I think is unique about cancel culture, besides a lot of people when they talk about cancel culture or political correctness, it's like, you get famous because a bunch of people like you, and then you say something where they don't like you, and then you're like, how dare that happen? And it's like, well, okay, but like you got famous and like you got money because you were saying things that people enjoyed, and so if they don't enjoy it anymore, that's kind of how it works. And so I think there's a sense of entitlement that some people can have when their stuff falls flat. The only thing I think is unique about cancel culture is the speed at which it happens, where someone says something and like immediately, like people are like there's a swarm of like mob on social media, and it happens really fast. Where like it just like happens. There's a swarm, and then they like target the people's institutions they belong to, get the person fired or whatever, and then like, whereas if everybody just waited like a week to see if people are still upset about it, usually they're not. And so like I think the speed is the thing that has made it unique. But in terms of like, like would I get canceled? Like would people not book me if I was saying stuff that was really hateful towards Muslims? Yeah, Muslims wouldn't book me to do like Muslim events if I did that. Like why is that weird? Like that's not weird at all. Like if I said I wouldn't get booked at Catholic events if I was saying like the Pope was evil or something. Actually, I'd probably get booked at more Catholic events if it was this Pope, right? It'd be like, this based Catholic guy is taking on Francis, right? But no, I mean like, so I think you can't really complain about like your stuff, like the ebb and flow of popularity. But I think there is a thing that happens where they like it happens very quickly and they target like your employers, and then like that sucks and that should stop. But then you should just wait.
But those are two very different points, and one of them is extremely valid, that if you were popular for something and now you're not popular, but if there's an organized campaign to target your institutions 100%. For you to lose your job, that's different than just not being popular any longer. And I certainly know it from Hollywood, and I certainly know it from my conservative friends in Hollywood, that if they know that you voted for Donald Trump, now there are a handful who are already so well established, the John Voights or the Gary Sinises. But when you're starting to come up, when you're trying to make a name for yourself, not only do you run into issues, but then there are going to be some of the other comedians, the Rosie O'Donnells, who will say to the club owner, if you book him, I'm going to go across the street to the Comedy Store, or I'm going to go down the street to Yuck Yucks or Ha-Ha's or Teehees or whatever. And the club owner who's just trying to make a living knows that Rosie's already a big name and this up-and-comer isn't. And just as a business decision, not even as a political vendetta, just as a business decision, it's not a wise move to come out and say you voted for Donald Trump in Hollywood.
It's true.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd also agree with the idea that the speed is what's changed, the technology aspect of it. Like the perennial desire to stop people from speaking out if you don't like what they're saying is nothing new, and now we have a very good tool to organize around the fact that you really want to silence someone, which is social media. And so I guess I don't know if I've changed my approach to comedy as much. I do think that it is kind of hypocritical for there are comedians who have not really been canceled and are doing fine in terms of bookings, like Dave Chappelle or something like that, where this idea that everybody is extremely uptight right now, and that's annoying, and I hate that. It's like I hate it too, but you use the tension from the backstop of people getting frustrated about you talking about certain things as the mechanism to tell a joke. Like people getting offended has to exist for most jokes to work, or at least people having some kind of like sacred cow around something. And so obviously there are people who've lost their jobs because of social media campaigns, and it's been unfair. But I also think there are that kind of outrage at maybe a more tempered level is necessary. Just like the feeling, like if everybody was just like, everything is okay all the time, I don't care about
Right.
child murder or necrophilia or anything like that. Coprophagia is great. It's like
What was that last word?
you can look it up after.
You're letting yourself show.
But yeah, I think a lot of comedians, their jokes wouldn't work because nobody would be like, oh, I really don't want this person to be talking about this thing right now. And then they would give the release of a punchline, which I just think is a very common way to work with jokes. Not that everything's offensive humor, but I do think for the people who work in that realm, it is necessary to have some level of outrage.
And like they thrive on it. Where like,
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of comedians who like pride themselves on getting canceled. And like, it turns out that like them getting canceled was like three tweeters were like, you're not funny. And they're like, I'm getting canceled. And then it's like they're telling people like, if you're against cancel culture, then you will also find me funny. And like, you're like, okay, but like tell a joke, like, you know. And so there's a kind of cachet in the sort of cottage industry now of comics who are like canceled or like triggering comedians who are like triggering everybody. And it's like, well, don't tell people that you're triggering, because then that's the warning of triggering. You should advertise yourself as a very pleasant comedian. And then when people come to your event, then
Come
you're
in
like
for
trans
a
people,
night
whatever,
of knock jokes.
Yeah,
and then you
right.
come in and they
Exactly.
start hitting them with the
exactly.
most offensive
But
things
like
you can
naming your comedy special Triggered is like, that's a warning. Like you should name it like, you know, rainbows and things everyone loves.
And
then,
pie.
Right. Pie. Right.
Pie.
Cake. Yeah. So
It's an inside joke.
yeah, there's a.
say. We came up with one inside joke
Yeah.
before.
So I don't like cake, and they were arguing with me about it. So we had this.
What kind of person doesn't like cake?
I know it's very offensive.
crazy.
So
Whatever that thing is you say you are.
Yeah. Coprophagic
hyperphilia, right?
stand-up
Whatever.
comedian.
Whatever. Yeah.
So-
So I think they're like, yeah, like you can't be against people getting offended when part of comedy is walking that line. Like, so the possibility of that line is always there. So it's.
But the
yeah.
audience also can't be easily offended, because that's what's there. That's when you walk in the door. If somebody, you know, I forget who it is. It might be Craig Shoemaker, if you know the comedian Craig Shoemaker, who says this is comedy. Somebody's going to get hurt.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and at some point it's either going to be you, and there's nothing wrong with self-deprecating humor, but at some point it's going to be you, the audience. It's going to be somebody. It's going to be somebody that you care about, whether it's a politician, whether it's a movie star, but there's always got to be somebody who's the punchline.
Right. Yeah. Some skin in the game is necessary a lot of the time.
So I'm going to ask the question before we move to the audience questions that everybody will be asking various versions of otherwise if I don't. And that is that it's often said that comedy has a liberal left bent. And what's your perspective on that? Is that just inaccurate? Are liberals just not seeing or understanding the conservative comedians that are out there? Help us understand that. I'll start with Evan for this. Yeah.
Well, first of all, let's differentiate and let's be clear the difference between a leftist and a lowercase L classical liberal. You know, the idea that you know woke culture or whatever is liberal. Well, then go back 50 years ago, and all the comedians who are out there would have been far right wingers. You know. There's a reason that the entertainment industry tends to skew liberal, and that is because most kids, most people, when they graduate from high school or graduate from college, tend to lean left. And then what tends to happen over the course of a lifetime is as you encounter the real world, you tend to move to the political right. I mean, everything at this point is theory to us when we're in school. Everything is theory, and if you're not a liberal in theory, then there's something wrong with you. If there are no consequences to your beliefs, then you should believe in utopia and all that stuff. But then you enter the real world, and you have to ask what works. But in the entertainment industry, you don't tend to enter the real world. In fact, quite the opposite. It is all fiction. You're making it all up. The other reality is it's the only profession in the history of the world where you get rich almost immediately. I mean, whether you're a rock star, whether you're a model, whether you're a stand-up comedian, you get fabulously wealthy very quickly if you even begin to start to make it. And so the decisions that you make and the challenges of the world that come from having to scrimp and save, and you just don't experience it. I mean, Joy Behar never had a real job. Rosie O'Donnell, and these are all people I know. These are all people I started out with. They never had a real job. Bruce Springsteen never had a real job. And so they never get to the point where they
skip what you think that
they
stage
skip
is.
the stuff that turns people. Because look, almost everybody, including myself, I'm a New York City-born liberal Jew in the entertainment industry. I wrote Politically Incorrect with Bill Maher for 6 years. But you know, you don't know a lot of people who over time grow up and become liberals, right? Most people are either liberal their whole lives or they become conservatives, like Bill Maher's becoming more and more conservative. And so there's that missing piece where you actually encounter real life.
Okay, yeah, so that explains the Jack-O-Lantern folks had given me the quote that you had said, "We don't have a Bill Maher for the right," and I was like, wait, he's pretty right now. So, okay,
Right.
now I'm understanding that better. So anything you two want to add to that? You don't have to, we can move on, but did you have anything different you wanted to add on top of that, or do you think that's roughly?
Well, I mean, one thing I will say is there are a lot of really great libertarian comedians, and I think that's a very good mindset to have. Like, you know, Mike Judge or the South Park guys. It's like to just come at it from this sort of like, I am just not dealing with any of this sort of perspective can produce a lot of really good comedy. And the Onion, I don't think we have libertarians on staff now, but for a
None
while,
that admit it, because you'd fire them right away.
yeah, we'd cancel them immediately. But for a while, we had a good libertarian contingent on the staff, like in the early aughts. And so I think distinguishing those two things is worthwhile. Like, I think there are a good number of libertarian, Penn and Teller, obviously, or at least one of them. And
Yeah, the other one
The
doesn't
quiet,
say
well, the
anything.
quiet
doesn't
one,
say
we don't know
things.
what he thinks. He's
As he
he's
should.
Yeah, he's a Trotskyist. Yeah.
As magicians should, they shouldn't speak up.
At least they're not mimes.
Right.
At least they know not to speak.
Yeah, and I mean, I think coming at it from a right-leaning perspective, there's nothing like prohibitive against like telling good jokes. That there's a Virginia Woolf line about how like men and women exist to tell each other what's on the back of the other person's head, and I think like in a healthy society, that's what we would be doing as left and right-leaning comics, is like pointing out the other's foibles and making them obvious in a way that like when you're kind of in an echo chamber filled with rage against the other side or whatever, you're not necessarily thinking about how you yourself are failing. But that's all like in the spirit of like John Stuart Mill and this grandiose idea of liberalism.
But that's actually a great moment, and which is every 4 years. It actually happens every year, but it's only important every 4 years. There's this event in New York City called the Al Smith Dinner. And it occurs after the last presidential debate every 4 years, and this goes all the way back to Eisenhower, and it's a big fundraiser for the Catholic Church, so I'm bringing everybody in on this one. And
Which I
everybody's
represent,
there, the governor is there, and everybody's there. And the two presidential candidates are there. And the tradition is they each come out and they do stand-up, basically, and they come out and they do some self-deprecating jokes. They throw a couple of light taps at the other, and the whole point of it is to show, okay, the campaign's over. It's been rough. It's been tumble. We've been beating each other up, but look, we're all Americans, and look how we are getting along.
Yeah.
And so it's as much as humor can be used as a weapon, it can also be used as salve. And as I said, the word I used earlier was a lubricant. And we're not doing that enough. We're not laughing at ourselves enough, and we're not accepting of the other enough.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think
Well, let's take some questions from the audience. Do we have people?
Jeremy had one.
Oh,
He had,
I'm
he had
Oh,
a
that's
really
fine. No,
good,
no,
he said it
I-
was the best thing that's going to be said the entire night. So we have to.
No, I think that, I mean, I know plenty of people who are right and left and center and libertarian or whatever, and who are funny. Like, there's nothing necessarily about those. But I think that there is something inherently anti-authoritarian about humor, where humor, the point of humor is to deconstruct language and deconstruct political, ideologies and deconstruct everything. And it's not necessarily constructive. It's not necessarily like, and now that I've told a joke about global warming, here's what we should do about it, right? Like, there's no, like, it's like, humor is sort of inherently negative. You're making fun of stuff and deconstructing everything. And so, but I think what it can do is sort of clear the way for, for whatever order one does believe should come after. And so a right-wing comedian wouldn't necessarily be less funny, but they would certainly have different opinions on what order does exist in nature, that they're deconstructing things in order to get to.
So can I ask you a question? All right, we look, and I think it was you who made the point earlier about the late-night comedians. Back before your day, there was a guy named Johnny Carson, and nobody knew where Johnny Carson stood politically. When the administration was Republican, he made fun of the Republicans. When the administration was, and if humor is a way of speaking truth to power, the idea that when you have the House, the Senate, the media, the universities, that the power isn't on that side, on the left side. Don't you think the late night comedians should be making more jokes at the expense of Biden, for example?
Sure, but that would hurt the war effort. That would
That's exactly right.
hurt the effort of their side, and so I think there's a kind of you have to have. It's just they don't want to notice the ridiculousness of their own side, or they think it's too risky, right? So
Well,
if
they don't
you don't want to help Trump, right?
Right. No matter what, the gun's got to be aiming forward.
Right.
And I think that's a big loss. And I think it's a big loss because if they laughed at themselves, it would be easier for our side to laugh at them too and enjoy them.
And yet I have to say, on the late night shows, that's the only place I've seen that devastating video of, Biden just kind of wandering around the stage and, not knowing where he is or whatever. I mean, I see those guys making fun of Democrats in tough ways. That's not a good look for Biden, right? That's not a good look for the Democrats.
Well, good
Yet
on them.
I don't really see that on the other side, right? Do you see comedians on the right skewering their own?
Well, how would you even make fun of Trump? I mean, that's one of the problems is that you can only make fun of people and making fun only. I mean, even that's what people said for years, that making fun of Trump doesn't work. And it's maybe you wanting something to work the way you want it to work is not the point of humor. But I don't know.
All right, well, let's bring it out from the audience. I saw some hands before. Who has a question?
We're that good? We answered them all?
Yeah, we covered
there we
everything.
go.
I'm seeing a hand back there.
A lot of these questions, I noticed the title of this is Politics Parodied and it's political satire. Is there a distinction to be made between comedy and satire? I'm particularly interested in that in light of some of the ways that you've asked the questions as comedy, and the responses to me have kind of conflated to me the difference between satire and comedy, or what are we talking about here?
Yeah, so satire is you're using comedy to mock the foibles of society or politics or culture. And comedy is more just a general umbrella term for things that make you laugh, I guess. And parody is this thing that's nested sort of inside of comedy, and sometimes verges on satire. And I talked about this in amicus brief to the Supreme Court that I co-authored recently, actually.
One of the funniest things he's
yes.
ever done.
That should have been in your bio, but anyway.
Nobody asked me for a bio. I wouldn't have included College Humor, a defunct website. Nobody knows anymore. So with parody, it goes, I mean, I know you asked for etymologies, so I'm going to give them to you. But the etymology of parody goes back to, it's para-ode, so it's an alteration of an ode. And the idea there was like, back in Roman times, someone like Horace would take the poetic form of an ode, and he would replicate it with the meter and the self-serious topic and the subject matter, and then he would tweak it really slightly so that it made fun of itself and kind of devoured itself from within. So The Onion's a parody because we are a para newspaper. Like, we are altering the form of a newspaper so it mocks an AP headline and stuff.
But you're also satirical.
We're also satirical, and that happens a lot. Those things will overlap. But I don't know if something, I don't know, maybe something like Austin Powers is parody but not satire, or maybe it's both. I love Austin Powers, so I just wanted to get that.
Obviously, it's not an easy answer because they so overlap. In my etymology, comedy is the umbrella. It's what makes you laugh. The other two, satire and parody, have a purpose. And one is a much broader version of the other, but they both have the purpose of ridiculing, scoring points via ridicule. Mm-hmm. One is by broad ridicule, and the other is by subtle ridicule. But you satirize something, you parody something in order to undermine it. It's a tool, it's a weapon.
See, I always heard that I have like a third definition of the two, which is that parody was always in reference to another work. Like Scary Movie is a parody of the things that it's making fun of, right? Or like parody, videos. Whereas satire was in reference to things in society. And then, of course, comedy is the art of all of that, and then humor is the sort of even more universal thing that everybody shares, even if you don't do it as an art form.
And there's actually like an even broader way of looking at.
We're gonna get into like, well, what is being? What is being? Like, what is the?
Now, tell me what wit means.
Well, Heidegger said that.
I was going to reference the humor theories of Henri Bergson, the French philosopher, but I apparently shouldn't because I'll just be made fun of.
But your former Dartmouth professors are so proud right now.
Wait. You're upset about being made fun of?
St. Thomas said that humor was a virtue of
the four humors in medieval times.
All right, did I see other hands? Because I got a million more questions here. Okay, yeah.
So my question mainly comes to, I've been a big fan for a long time of more scripted, fictional style satire works. A lot of movies like, classic Mel Brooks, Monty Python's Life of Brian, and recent television shows like Veep. I wonder what your take is on modern scripted satire in that sort of fictional form.
It's great.
Yeah.
I hate to admit that I don't watch a great deal of episodic television, and so I mean, everybody says Veep is terrific. If I'm gonna watch episodic television, because I'm just so involved in politics these days, I'm just so involved with this stuff that I'm more likely to watch Resident Alien than I am, House of Cards or whatever. So I'm going to beg off of this question. I have no opinion at all. Sorry.
I think there's a lot of really good stuff on there being television world or something. I don't know what I'm saying. I think some of the stuff you mentioned is great. I got I fell down a rabbit hole and started watching these videos, Philomena Kunk, which is it's like a British kind of, that's one person knows what I'm talking about.
Got some Philomena stands in the house.
Another extremely lonely person in the audience. But it's this actress, Diane Morgan, she's kind of doing stuff that's really in the spirit of early Daily Show, where it's more making fun of the format and much sillier and less trying to like score political points necessarily. So if you ever are looking for more satirical scripted stuff, that's all amazing, and I really recommend it.
Okay, all right, we got a question over here in the blue sweater.
Oh yeah, me.
Oh, there's two blue sweaters. Okay, we'll
yeah,
start
sure.
there and go down there. Yeah.
Yeah. Pass. Okay. So I just wanted to ask, like, do you think like the Will Smith punch had any effect on comedy? Yeah.
Yeah.
People made jokes about it, so that's the effect.
Punch. Yeah. Whether it affects
Does it worry you? Does it make you nervous when you're doing stand-up?
No.
Not unless Will Smith's in the audience.
Which only happens like 2 or 3 times a year. I mean, thankfully I have a screen between myself and everybody who views my jokes, so I never have to interact with them unless I want to. So nobody's ever hit me because of a joke. We've had armed guards every once in a while, but like after getting death threats. But
what about what happened in France with
Charlie Hebdo?
Charlie Hebdo?
Yeah,
Did
no.
that scare you?
That was one of the times we got an armed guard. Yeah, and so for a while we were like, that's scary, but then it seemed like they weren't going to kill us, and now we are totally off guard, and it's time to strike.
And where are your offices again?
Yeah.
It's all online. We really shouldn't advertise it.
All right, I had seen another hand down here. If we don't have any, okay.
Oh, sorry, I'm holding it. So you guys kind of talked a little bit, touched on the subject of how comedy and satire can influence people. I think that because of its inherent lightheartedness, it is something that it's easy to turn on, especially today's age of, like there's all this bad news everywhere. Evan, you said something about the diversification of the comedy world and things like that. Wouldn't you say, though, that by creating a more diverse opinion of politics from a wider variety of people, you're positively influencing all those people that are kind of absorbing that comedy output? I think I just hit the microphone. Sorry, I lost my.
No, I think we got it. If you don't mind, yeah. I think as with everything else, I think diversity is absolutely great, but it's got to be based first and foremost on merit. You know, just to put somebody up on the stage because it's going to make somebody who looks like that person feel better about themselves, then it's not going to be comedy. So there, a diverse group of people, whoever can bring an audience, whoever can bring enough people to think they're funny, to make money. I mean, that's what's great about capitalism, is that you get to decide who you think is funny, who you want to go see. It's not the government forcing you into it. It's not quotas forcing people onto you. And if diverse voices are diversely funny, I think that's great. Couldn't be better.
And yet, capitalism seems to have decided that women aren't funny enough to lead late-night televisions, and even late-night television, and just canceled the one out there, which was Samantha Bee, right? So what is that? Just
well, I would actually say that
women are allowed to be writers for men, right? Right. So like you want to, well, women are funny, but I got to hear a man say the thing they wrote. That's the important thing.
What's funny is the people who make those decisions, though, are the Hollywood liberals. You know, they're the ones who are running the studios. They're the ones who are running, and I think they're the ones who have...
that never stopped the boys' club, though, folks. The liberals can be sexist too. So.
Oh, indeed, they're terrible.
I think that the diversification of the comedy industry, the decentralization and therefore the diversification of the comedy industry is just 100% positive. And I think that's because language is a common good, and it's one that we all share. None of us are using words we made up. This is something that we're all a part of, and we all come online through language. And having as many voices as possible to deconstruct it is always in service of the common good. But again, right, it has to be funny. And none of the people that go to I don't think anybody who wants more diversity in comedy or wants more representation is like, I want to see a really unfunny black comic. Like no one, they all want to laugh. So I think, obviously it's about merit in terms of being funny, but it's also if comedy is all about surprise, to be surprised means getting people who are not like you to point out the things that you don't notice.
And to go back to a question you asked earlier, how things changed, is the advent of the internet and the advent of all these opportunities has democratized the ability. Anybody now, it used to be you had to go through the studios. Now you don't have to go through the studios. So if you can put together something that's funny and garner an audience.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see who replaces James Corden and Trevor Noah, huh? Okay, I see a hand over here.
I have 2 questions. You can just choose whichever one you find more interesting. My first question is, you've talked a lot about the importance of being like liberal and sort of like liberal in the classical sense of sort of talking about a variety of things when you're a comedian. But is there a line that's drawn anywhere? And if so, where is that line drawn? And how do we determine it? And my second question is, it seems that in recent years, there's been a move not just towards more liberal or conservative, but towards more political in comedy, away from like the absurdity or like puns or like making fun of polite society that we see in a lot of older comedies. And I was curious as to why you think that is and if that is harmful. So yeah, choose one.
Yeah, I think I really don't feel like the people who are just purely political are actually doing comedy, and I think a lot of people can feel that intuitively. The idea that you would go into a room to clap at a reflection of your own the political point that you already have, it's just like an insane thing to do. Like, I'm just gonna reaffirm my own political beliefs in a room for an hour and spend money on it. Like, you can just stand in a room and talk to yourself for that amount of time. And I think there are a lot of people who have made careers off that, and it's like, why? It's not really doing the art form justice. So I like all the silliness and the absurdism, and I wish it was more at the heart of comedy. Not that like having offensive things or going into weird places isn't interesting, but I miss it. And I think that's what I really like about The Onion is we mix all of these things together. And so you can come and get a political take and an observational take and just a weird pun that's like the entire thing is written in rhyming couplets for some reason. And all of that adds up to like, okay, these people are playing around and being creative, and that's really interesting and nice. What was,
Is anything out of bounds was the other question.
Yeah, I think the other question, I thought the questions were both so interesting that I am answering both. Yeah, so for me, I mean, I think the stock answer is just, there is nothing that's out of bound, it's just how you approach it. And so something like mortality is something that somebody who's just lost a loved one probably doesn't want to talk about. But for me, some of the funniest moments in my life are like, somebody close to me has died. That's it, and that's the end of it. Because I hated that person. No, and then we're standing in the waiting area in like the hospice, and everybody's just so messed up by this moment of somebody who's just was there in the room with you, and they've disappeared forever. They've been vaporized.
That is funny.
Yeah. But then you just start talking shit about this person. Or you just make fun. Why were they talking about the furniture at some party like 20 years ago? That's the last thing you're gonna say to us? And that's like, you break the tension in that moment, and you can actually
look, there's a whole thing called gallows humor.
Yeah,
you
exactly.
know, they made jokes in the death camps, and thank God they did. At least they had that. So it really depends on, and look, I started my father's eulogy with a joke. Yeah. I looked down, my father was much beloved. I don't know how he happened to make my sister. But, so I looked out at the crowd. Yeah, that made me nervous.
That's the joke you started with.
No, so I looked out. Do I ever interrupt you? So I looked out at the hundreds of people who were there, and I looked at the casket, and I said, I've got to talk to my agent about these gigs he's getting me. All right? And my father would have loved it. It broke the tension. And so, no, there really is nothing, depending on how you do it, what your heart is, what what the purpose is. It can also be the very opposite, and even the most innocuous subject can be dealt with cruelly. So it really depends on how you handle it.
Yeah, I joke about my father dying all the time. He doesn't like it.
Okay, I see a hand all the way back there. We can go for just a few more minutes. So in the back corner there. Getting some exercise for our microphone guy.
Hi, my question would be specific to Mike. Is there anything that you remember writing for the Jack-O, but that would not pass the vibe check for the Onion today?
The vibe check. Oh, like,
Yeah, like, that would be
you
an
want me to
absolute-
dredge up offensive things that I wrote that nobody would accept at this moment while it's being filmed, and this can go online and ruin my life. I wrote some things that were like mildly offensive, but I think The Onion is way more offensive than what I wrote. I wrote these long digressive things that were based on like dreams I've had sometimes that were about, I think one thing I wrote was about having sex with a warhorse, which is I don't know, it was like a series of letters to the man who owned the warhorse from the movie The Warhorse. This guy just really wanted to like buy the horse so he could have sex with him, but he was also going to be a really nice owner. And he was like, this horse isn't going to do anything after this movie, so you might as well give it to me. So I don't know what it's bestiality, but it's kind of in like a lighthearted vein.
Really
punching up.
Anyway. Okay, all right. We'll take one last question back there. Yeah.
So, you just mentioned.
Wow.
Hey.
No, at the same time.
We'll take
go.
two.
Okay. We just you guys mentioned Trevor Noah and James Corden. I was wondering, one, why is, just in my opinion, why has late night comedy become less funny? And number two, what's its future? Because it kind of just seems like with the diversification of media right now, there just doesn't seem a market for it. It just seems more like people clapping at news.
Do you guys want to answer?
Yeah, I mean, we've already discussed it a little bit, which is these are not entertainers who are liberal or leftist. They're leftists who are entertainers. They're using so immediately, you've cut out half of your material. If you can't laugh at half of the nation, you've suddenly limited your palate, and then even then. They've got to be cruel. If it's Donald Trump, I mean, when Jimmy Fallon had Trump on the show and he mussed his hair, he got destroyed by his fans. He dropped to number 3 in the ratings because he humanized Donald Trump. And so when you've weaponized humor and cut out half of your material. When you've replaced, as I said earlier, humor with vitriol, there's not a lot of joy in it any longer. There's not a lot of wit. There's not a lot of subtlety. All of the things that make it a craft, make it an art, have been removed. We used to talk about this when I was writing Arsenio, and Arsenio was getting a little bit like that. And all we had to do was write blah, 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 Quayle. Dan Quayle. Blah, 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 Quayle. That's all you had to do to get in the monologue. Blah, 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 Quayle. And all you have to do now is blah, 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 isn't Trump Hitler? And you're in.
Does anybody else want to weigh in on that one? Or I just want to say, Trevor Noah is skewering Americans as much as anything else, right?
I don't know. I've never watched him.
Well, okay.
I was too busy watching Samantha Bee.
I would recommend
Go
it.
women.
Okay. Anyway, all right, let's take one last question.
Thanks. So I know that in the last week, I think Elon Musk said comedy is now legal. But as one of the people who actually had the pleasure of reading the Supreme Court brief, I would say that that's a case where the police shut down somebody for putting up a parody site. So the question then is, to me is, what's the coming era of comedy looking like? Is it about to flourish? Are we now in the era of free and happy comedy, or are we shrinking and things are getting more shut down?
Yeah, well, for people who aren't aware, the case that we submitted an amicus brief on is this guy, Anthony Novak, who was arrested for creating a parody Facebook page of the Parma, Ohio Police Department, and they confiscated his personal devices and kept him in jail for 4 days, and had a SWAT raid on his house because he created this parody page. This is not necessarily a good precedent for the First Amendment, and so we decided to weigh in on it and also tried to start a larger conversation about why parody should be protected under free speech. And so, yeah, we kind of are at this weird crossroads, aren't we, where I think there are a lot of fantastic comedians right now, and there are more opportunities than ever. There's it's a nicely flattened playing field where people can just upload stuff to YouTube and get 10 million views and not go through any kind of mainstream network. And so you can just, if you're just curious about somebody who somebody told you this person is terrible, you should never look at them because they have this view or that view, you can just go online and watch an hour-long video of them telling jokes and be
unless Facebook has shut it down, like they've shut down my Facebook page.
Oh wow, okay, yeah. So
I also was permanently banned from Twitter. But if I may, if I may, I think we're going to see a renaissance. I think we're going to see, enough is enough with all this. It's just humor. It's just jokes. I think you're going to see a golden age of comedy coming.
Okay. All right. Well, I would like to thank everybody for coming to this. This was a lot of fun. I really appreciate our panelists' time. That was fantastic.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Finally, to the students out there, I'd just like to implore you to occasionally, when your professors make a joke, or at least try to, just give them a little laugh. It'll make their day. And if you say something about them being funny on your student evaluations at the end of the quarter, you will make their year. So keep that in mind at the end of the quarter. Thank you to our panelists, and thank you for coming today. And thanks to the...
That was really fun.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
I'm probably still talking very loudly, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just one last thing. Yeah.
Oh man, you were wrong.
That was terrible. Never coming back here again.
So before we wrap up, Anders and I wish to specifically thank some of our incredible DPU and Jack-O-Lantern staff for making this possible. So we wanted to thank Kavya Navarthi, the DPU's treasurer, and Dylan Griffith, the DPU's technical director, for the work and time that went into planning this. Finally, thank you to our wonderful moderator, Professor Brooks, and our wonderful... and our fantastic panelists as well, and of course the audience, all of you, for a delightful and humorous evening. We hope to see you all again soon. Have a great one.